Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's event. Today's industry webinar, Accelerate Innovation in Life Science Manufacturing, CSA has given you the license to do it, is presented by Axendia Inc., an analyst firm providing trusted advice to life science executives on business, technology, and regulatory issues, and brought to you by Tulip. The leader in frontline operations is helping companies around the world equip their frontline workforce, leading to improved productivity, higher quality, and increased efficiency across their operations. With Tulip's no-code platform, companies can empower those closest to operations to digitally transform processes, guide frontline workers, and gain real-time visibility into the people, tools, machines, and processes involved, all in a matter of days. Companies of all sizes across industries, including pharma, consumer electronics, aerospace and defense, contract manufacturing, automotive, apparel, medical devices have implemented Tulip's intuitive platform to solve some of the most pressing challenges in operations, error-proofing processes and boosting productivity with guided workflows, capturing and analyzing real-time data, and continuously improving operations. We also want to share with you Axendia's safe harbor statement. The contents of today's session represent Axendia's analysis sourced from Axendia's primary quantitative and qualitative research, interaction with regulatory officials, industry executives, as well as first-hand experience. This event is not intended to endorse any company or product and should not be attributed as such. So let's meet our presenters today. First, we have Bob Uhlman. He's the head of quality for digital strategy for AstraZeneca. He's responsible for the design and implementation of the company's quality department's digital transformation program that includes data analytics and computer validation process improvement. Bob is a subject matter expert on data integrity and has over 35 years of experience in the pharmaceutical industry. He has defined and developed world-class company-wide data integrity programs. He has presented on data integrity to regulatory agencies around the world, including the FDA, and has presented at many industry conferences, including the PDA and ISPE. He has written an article for PDA on data integrity and also was an original member of the PDA task force on data integrity. We also welcome Michelle Volo. She's the head of quality Tulip. Before joining Tulip, Michelle spent over 24 years in the biopharmaceutical and medical devices industry, ranging from laboratory, engineering, technical support, quality assurance, and computer systems compliance. She has domain expertise in GAMP, CSA, Validation 4.0, lifecycle management of computer systems, electronic record, electronic signature compliance, data integrity, risk management, medical device quality management, medical device design controls, pharmaceutical quality systems. Her focus and passion is to make Pharma 4.0 available and achievable in the regulated world. And last but not least, we welcome Dan Matlis. He's the president and founder of Axendia Inc. Dan has 3 decades of industry experience spanning the life science value chain. He's a member in FDA's Case for Quality Initiative and FDA's Advisory Council on the Enrichment in Silico Clinical Trial. Dan has presented Axendia's research findings to industry executives and the FDA officials. He's a frequent lecturer at industry events and has published numerous research reports and articles on key issues facing the life sciences and healthcare industries. Now, without further ado, we turn over the session to Dan and our panelists today.
Thank you. And good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on what part of the world you're joining us from. I'm honored to be speaking with you today, and it's a pleasure to share the stage with Bob and Michelle to discuss how you can accelerate innovation by using a common sense approach to validation. So let's get started. And Bob, maybe you can tell us a little bit about AstraZeneca and some of the digital transformation goals and initiatives that you're undertaking.
Yeah, great, Dan. Thanks for having me. Great to be here, everybody. So at AstraZeneca, we're looking at what we call digitally transforming, right? How do we more modernize our processes to deliver more value to our patients? And we break it down basically into 3 buckets of science and innovation, right? Growth and therapy area leadership, and really people and sustainability. So how can we grow the company, continue to develop new medicines, and be able to deliver medicines all across the globe faster to our patients and at a reasonable cost as well. So if we go to the next slide, Dan, we'll see that quality has a big role in that. And so when we break it down in quality, we're looking at things like collaboration, right? One of the biggest things that we need to do is collaborate more effectively in quality. How do we collaborate with our IT organizations or engineering functions, other business functions? We have continuous verification that we want to be able to start moving towards faster and better ways of validating systems, getting systems and processes all aligned and standardized, and a big emphasis on data. You know, we have all this new technology coming out, right? Artificial intelligence, machine learning tools and stuff of that nature. But we need to focus on our data in order for us to enable us to use those tools. And of course, integrating processes and systems, right? The more we standardize, the more we integrate, the better off we are. A lot of times you hear companies, you know, we'll have a workaround and we're going to use paper for a little while. And this will be a paper-based process. The more hybrid systems we have, the less connected systems we have, the harder it becomes to include all data sets. And when we don't have all data sets, we can't use it for advanced analytics. So that's what our goal really is transforming, is looking at these buckets here of collaborating, verifying, focusing on data, and really integrating our systems and processes. And finally, you know, we try to tell everybody, and we read across this quote here, technology doesn't provide the value to our business. So we have folks that all they want to do is bring in new technology, new technology, new technology. But as you read the middle one, the value of technology really comes from doing your business in a different way and how you enable that technology. And that's really what we're looking at. And when I started at AstraZeneca about 3.5 years ago or so, I was put in this role and I said, you know, I'm not even going to look behind the covers, but I'm going to tell you the number one thing that's preventing us from really advancing is our software validation process. I can tell you that right now. It's a big company, AstraZeneca. I think we have over 90,000 people spread out all over the world. That's what's gonna matter. We can bring in technology, but if our validation processes are archaic, very paper-based, we're going to run into all kinds of issues. And so we've got a big program on uplift of that, which we'll talk about.
Thanks, Bob. And you make some excellent points. You know, there's a lot of focus typically on validation, but validation, ultimately, it's about assuring a state of control, right? That your systems are in a state of control. How you do that needs to be flexible. And to your point, technology is a tool, right? Technology doesn't solve a problem. A hammer doesn't solve your problem. You need to know what the problem is and then use the hammer if that happens to be the right tool. So I think these are extremely important points that you're making. So I want to talk a little bit about CSA. I've personally been involved with the team that has developed the CSA guidance for about 5 years. And one of the big challenges that we saw as an industry, and to give you some background, when I started in industry, I was the subject matter expert for my division on computer system validation when the quality system regulations first came out and explicitly required medical device companies to validate software. So what we did, along with my quality partner, is put together a Lotus 1-2-3 spreadsheet that would tell everybody what documentation you needed to create. That was the focus of validation. How many documents can you create? So CSV, as you can see at the top of the pyramid, the largest area is how many documents can you create and what kind of documentation. And then you focus on testing activities. What are the assurance needs? And frankly, there was very little critical thinking that happened. It was all about checking boxes and documents. So with CSA, the intent is to turn the pyramid upside down and start with critical thinking. And one of my big pet peeves is just because you're critical, it doesn't make you a critical thinker. If you're always saying no, or if you're always criticizing, that does not make you a critical thinker, which is a huge challenge within our industry. But instead, let's think critically, then let's look at assurance needs, then look at testing activities, and finally look at the right level of documentations. And one of my favorite quotes from Cisco Vicente at FDA, who runs the CSA program, is that records need to be of value to the organization, not only to the auditor. We shouldn't be creating documents because the auditor is going to need them. if they have no value to us. So with that in mind, Bob, can you share why does it take so many resources, time, money, people to validate our systems today?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? We're always faced with this dilemma, right? That people actually want to run from validation, right? It's oh my goodness, I don't want this to be a GMP system because then I have to validate it, and that takes forever, and we don't have that much time, and we don't have that much money. And I argue with folks about this: is you're in a pharmaceutical manufacturing building. You might even be on the floor. You might be in the lab. Why are you having the discussion about is it GMP or not? Right? It is GMP. You're in that building. What you should be doing, like you were bringing up, Dan, is talking about what's critical, right? So what's the intended use of this particular piece of equipment, right? What are you trying to accomplish with this piece of equipment or this system? And focusing in on those critical controls. And I think when you look at many companies, and AstraZeneca is like this, and we're moving away from it, it's a one size fits all, and that scares everybody, right? So now you're back to that inverted pyramid where the documentation is the greatest piece, right? We're writing validation plans, and we're writing summary reports and test reports and protocols and all these documents, and it's a one size fits all, and that's what scares people away, and that's what costs all the time and the money. And to the quote of the FDA person you had on there, what's the value of that to the company of having all these documents? What value does that bring? They usually go and they sit on an electronic document management system that nobody ever goes and looks at or something like that. So we have to think differently, right? The critical thinking. It's easy to say critical thinking, but what does that mean, right? And it's really getting into things like intended use. How do you plan on using the system? Right, looking at that, what matters, making approaches scalable, right? And we'll talk a little about that coming up in this presentation here. But that's where it is. That's why it takes so long. It's because it's a one size fits all. We think every time we roll out a system, we have to have all this documentation. We scare people away from saying it's GMP, and then we wind up bringing in extra resources, right? Because we need all these different people to validate a system. And I think that's where we run into the problems.
Yep. Michelle, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So thanks. I have just a couple explicit examples when just answering the question directly. What takes so many time and resources? Like there's so much duplicative and repetitive and repeat work that's a lot of times done. Whether it's at my current role here at Tulip or whether it's from my previous lives, there's been so much time that's been spent on redoing what vendors have done. I think a lot of vendors do work explicitly with the life sciences and regulated industries and are providing much better documentation packages to support the tools that they're providing. And the newer tools like platforms that are provided typically come pre-qualified or already qualified, so that the customer, the consumer, the regulated industry can focus on their value-added activities, like Bob was saying, like Dan was saying, like on your specific intended use. We'll get into more details on that later, but that's just one example that I have seen in the past that is a lot of effort, it's a lot of time, it's adding no value. Yeah.
We actually have done some research, and what we have found is that for every dollar a company spends implementing a new technology solution, they actually spend about $1 to $1.50 documenting it. Now, that is astronomical numbers, right? But where it gets even worse is that when they upgrade a system, so a platform now adds a couple of features or functions that weren't available before, they'll spend 30 cents on the technology part, and they will still spend $1 to $1.50 on the documentation because they'll have to revalidate the entire platform, even though there were a couple of features and functions. And that's the kind of mentality that we need to change within the industry. We cannot continue to over document because that's what we've always done. So let's move
Yeah.
to the, go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that real quick, Dan. You know, I've seen before in past companies where you buy an HPLC, the cost of validating is more than the purchase of the HPLC, and that's crazy. And what happens is that all you're doing is you're creating documentation and testing the software that the vendor's already tested, and you've missed the intended use. And this is why we had all these data integrity issues in the industry. It's because you're not analyzing the equipment and looking at the configuration settings of what needs to be set, how you're going to use it. Instead, we're so focused on spending money and retesting that the alarm works over and over and over again, that we know the alarm works when you open up the door.
Perfect example. So with that in mind, Bob, what are some of the common sense approaches that companies can take to reduce the unnecessary documentation and overhead?
Yeah, you know, when you look at this slide here, this is a battle we've had with people, and I found this from Oracle. They talk about digitization and digitalization. And so again, when you're looking at digitizing something, so we're trying to take a piece of paper and we're going to go digitize it. All we're going to do is take a piece of paper and make it electronic. And the cost of doing that is unbelievable. And I'll explain in a second. And then there's digitalization, where you're taking a process and you're trying to digitalize it. So maybe, you know, release by exception, or maybe, you know, as we're saying here, release by exception, but maybe there's other processes that we're trying to digitize. And so what happens is we have these one size fits all processes, right, in validation. Well, if I'm going to digitize a piece of paper, and again, let's use Tulip as an example. So here's a low code, no code application that we can use to our benefit. And we want to take a simple piece of paper in the laboratory of maybe how I have a book or a log on how I'm using that piece of equipment. So a name, date, you know, I ran a calibration on it, and then I have another line on it, or a room log book, right? I can digitize that. Well, if you're going to digitize that following your validation processes, you're going to be writing validation plans and URSs and specifications and all this testing for a piece of paper. And then people are going to ask you questions about how do you do periodic reviews of these things here. And I actually sit there and say, well, forget it. I don't want to digitize it anymore. It costs way too much and there's too much overhead for this, right? So we have to come up with more scalable approaches, right? When we're looking at the intended use of that piece of paper, how critical is that piece of paper, right? Even though we're going to digitize it, what is it that we're going to do? Why do we need all these controls? Is everything at the same level of GMP, right? Aren't there scalable approaches? And that's really what we should be looking at. And I think the more we do that, and the more we use the critical thinking term again, right? The more critical thinking we do, the better off we are. It's okay if that piece of paper doesn't have a validation plan. It doesn't matter if that piece of paper doesn't have a URS. What matters is there's a control over that piece of paper, right? Such as maybe I can only log into a certain version of that form. And so that's what we're looking for. And so, you know, again, thinking things like that it's not a one size fits all. There's scalable approaches to all this based on intended use. And we use the term, you know, CSA. So I was talking to Dan and Michelle yesterday about this. We use the term CSA, and it goes out there, and our IT organization said, finally, we can do something. And my team looked at it and laughed and said, you know, we've been doing this for many years. All we do is call it the common sense approach, CSA, right? Use common sense and we'll be better off for it.
Absolutely. Michelle, any thoughts from you that jump up?
Yeah, I mean, I have so much to say on this, like digitization versus digitalization. Like I get caught up, I forget which one's which a lot of times, but the point is so important, right? Like the point is that if we keep doing the same thing we're doing, we're not going to get the values, right? I always say, like, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. So we need to do things differently. The process to truly digitalizing is looking at your process, taking advantage of the technical controls that these technologies, you know, have or have the capabilities to do for you. You know, we'll dive into this a little bit deeper. I have a schematic of that, but this is a really, really important point. And I think also feeds into some of the cultural aspects of this digital journey. And I call it a journey because it's never ending. Like it's always going to be this continuous thing, but you need to think outside the box. You can't just pick up what you have on your paper and translate it directly into a digital tool. You're going to get some benefits, but there's a lot more to be gained.
Completely agree. And that's why, some of the things that we advocate is whether digitalization, ultimately, it's a digital transformation, right? You need to transform the way you do business, not only put what you have on paper now in an electronic paper, because electronic paper, that doesn't have the value. You have to streamline the process. You have to look at ways to improve the process rather than just saying, I have a paper record and now I have an electronic paper record. How do we improve the process? So with that in mind, a lot of the work that we talked about around CSA is a risk-based approach. And one of the things we always remind industry companies is look at the predicate rules. Look at the actual regulatory requirements. What does it say about validation? What does it say about data integrity? And if you look at that original guidance that was written in 1999, very boldly, Al Taylor and John Murray from FDA wrote that industry needs to use the least burdensome approach to assurance. And if you look at that guidance, it's not that far out from a common sense approach. I think the challenge has been, as an industry, we see least burdensome approach and we do exponent to the -1 and say, how can we make it as burdensome as possible? How can we add more steps and processes and procedures to make sure that we don't violate the original intent? So the risk-based approach, to Bob's point, is not new. What CSA does is gives industry that new permission, that new guidance, that fresh set of current thinking from the agency saying, hey, focus on the intended use. Start there. What are you going to use this feature or function? Not the whole system. Not the old, if one feature or function in the system is high risk, then the whole system is high risk. Look at them individually and how you're going to use them. Then determine what's the best risk-based approach to address that feature function. Then look at the methods and activities that you're going to use to assure that you're meeting that intended use and using a true risk-based approach. And then and only then, look at what is the appropriate level of documentation that you can implement. So as we're going through this, Michelle, how can companies implement digital tools, the latest and greatest digital tools, focusing on assurance activities for an intended use?
Yeah. Before I dive into this slide, I think I would start by bringing something up that I think Bob mentioned in a conversation that we had the other day, just a casual conversation about nobody cared about paper in the past. And what just to provide you some context of that conversation, was funny because, when we have a batch record, for example, right, a batch record is probably one of the most critical things that we can manage, or the most critical record that we can manage in life sciences, because it's your recipe and it's your build of your product. But back in the day when everything was on paper, nobody cared about the piece of paper it was written on or printed on or whatever, but they cared about the recipe. They cared about making sure that the critical process parameters and critical quality attributes were defined correctly and the ranges were correct. And so that's a really important aspect to answer your question directly, Dan. This what you're seeing on the slide here is sort of an approach that we've come up with just out of some work with the Validation 4.0 group, which is a working group with an ISPE, the International Society of Pharmaceutical Engineering, who are also the authors of GAMP. I'll be crystal clear here that this Validation 4.0 group that I refer to is not looking at computer system validation, there's a GAMP group already for that. It's not looking at process validation. There are other groups looking specifically at that. This validation 4.0 group is looking at what it means to validate. We're looking at the forest, not the trees, right? We're getting back to basics, understanding the objective of what validation is even, right? It's not a methodology, but it's really about how we demonstrate control. It's really important aspect for us to kind of start thinking about what it might look like to validate differently, especially in the digital world. So what we have here is really looking at this digitization that we've talked about, right? It's looking at the process that we're looking to digitize and those data flows that are relevant to that process. So if we can identify the process flows and the data elements by which we need to capture during that process, we now have a great foundation for risk assessment. Now, I've used ICHQ9 here, but the point is not methodology. The point is that this is where you perform and do your risk assessment, right? You do your risk assessment at the data level because that's what we know. That's where we know which is most critical. If we're using good design controls or quality by design aspects, we know explicitly what process steps and which data elements are of most importance to control in order to achieve a desired level of quality. So if you perform your risk assessment during this phase of, kind of mapping out what you're digitizing, then with most of the tools that are available, most of the technology that is available, you can design a lot of those controls directly into the tool that you have. Like I mentioned earlier, there's the modern tools that we have, like the no-code platforms, the composable platforms, allow you to kind of configure these controls directly into your tool. So the point here is take advantage of these tools to kind of be a part of your control strategy. And the idea here then is that validation then can just become demonstrating that your controls are in place and effective for achieving that desired level of quality. So if you can see here, and as you follow through this flow, is that it becomes really important to understand your design, your product, your process, know where your risks are so that you can demonstrate control. I think somebody else, Cameron, not to call you out specifically, but I noticed your comment, and I know that this is sort of one of the reservations of a lot of people to do things differently is, the regulators, they have to accept it. Now, if you have a risk-based control strategy around this and you demonstrate through the controls that you have focused your controlled area, you verified that your controls are in place and effective, this is demonstrating or being able to provide you the great tools based on the items that are out there that you can defend compliance, you can defend control, you can demonstrate your sort of justification and reason for doing it in this way. So I think that this is really a high level view of it, but the point is use the things that are out there, meaning quality by design or design controls if you're from a med device operation. Use your risk assessment based on your designs, design those controls into the tools so that the technology really just becomes an opportunity to implement controls.
Yep, absolutely. And I noticed there was one of the comments saying that regulatory has to accept this new approach. And I think that's a very telling comment. When we're talking about regulatory, are we talking about the regulators or are we talking about our internal regulatory people? And the challenge we find is often with what we call regulatory inertia. So to your point earlier, Michelle, if you always do what you've always done, then you always get what you've always gotten, right? It's the other definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Well, it's up to us to challenge our internal regulatory folks to say, let's go back to the predicate rule. What does it actually say we have to do? And then, yes, our procedures are very, very burdensome. How can we unburden ourselves from what we have created rather than blaming the regulators and saying they're not letting us? No, it's not that they're not letting us. It's often that we're not letting ourselves take advantage of the new approaches, or actually the flexibility that is built into most of the regulations. So when we look at risk, and we talked about it a little bit earlier, not all risk is created equal. There's a hierarchy of risk. And understanding, once you understand what is the intended use, what are the features, functions, how are you going to use them, then when it comes to risk assessment, look at how does that map against the hierarchy of risk. And obviously, patient risk is the most critical. Anything that touches the patient, we need to ensure with the highest degree of confidence that will operate as intended. Does software fall into category? Does this particular feature or function within the software fall into that category? Then yes, we need to do everything possible to have the highest level of confidence that it will work. But not everything has patient risk. Then the next level of risk is product risk. Not every product risk ties directly into patient risk. Most of it does, but not all. Why? Because we have processes and procedures that will likely catch product issues before they make it to the patient. And that is something we need to take into consideration. And then we have process risk, right? Our manufacturing processes, we have a deviation in the process. We need to understand what is the impact of that process deviation. Does it in fact impact the product? Does it impact the patient? And if it doesn't, it has a different level of risk. And then, and only then, do you look at regulatory or quality system risk. And the example I like to use, and actually it's in the guidance, is around training. Let's say that an operator's training expired at midnight, and they come tomorrow and run the process, the same process they've been running for the last year. And they knew how to do it yesterday, and they come in and run it today. What is the patient risk? It's zero, because they didn't forget how to run the process overnight. They're not a digital entity that their memory got wiped. What is the process risk? Again, zero. Product risk. Yes. Is there a regulatory risk? Yes. We violated our SOPs, and we also may have violated the predicate rule. But the level of risk there is very different than patient. And then ultimately, it's business risk. Most of us work for profit corporations, and therefore we want to make sure that our paychecks are accurate, right? You hope that whoever put that financial system or that paycheck system did some appropriate level of testing to ensure that your paycheck is accurate every 2 weeks. So there's a certain level of testing, but it's not the same level of assurance. And we need to take into consideration risk. So with that in mind, Bob.
Dan, can I just mention one last thing to you on that? I just want to kind of dive into that one last thing. It's like taking risk. The point is here is like, yes, there's a risk hierarchy, but taking risk, meaning focusing on the higher risk items, requires knowledge, right? That is the point. And I think in absence of knowledge and understanding of our products and processes and things like that, you're going to be risk averse. The idea is you have to be knowledgeable of your product and process in order to take, risks.
I couldn't agree with you more. And actually, our research, we actually asked this question: what is the number one reason why you don't improve processes? And the top answer is lack of process understanding. We do not understand our processes well enough to be willing to take that risk to improve them. Mm-hmm. So that is critical, and a critical point. We need to understand processes. We need to understand risk. We need to understand intended use. So, Bob, can you talk about some of the activities that you're taking in order to address this hierarchy of risk and to do the appropriate level of documentation?
Risk, and we'll get to the slide here in a second, but risk is something we do every day, right? Yeah. So we 35 years, 36 years in this industry, all we hear is we're going to take a risk-based approach to validation. Well, that's what we've been doing. And guess what, folks? We've done it wrong. We've validated systems wrong for the past years and years and years. And that's why folks like Monica Kahili made millions of dollars going around telling everybody we had data integrity issues, because we did it wrong. We took the wrong risk-based approach. That's what was happening, right? And if you go back one slide to the hierarchy there, Dan, right, what we're basically saying is that you're sorting risk differently, right? Mm-hmm. You're looking at it more from a patient perspective, a product perspective, right? And before we were looking more, and we still do, right? We're looking more at a business perspective. We're testing things for the sake of testing. We're afraid of what regulators are going to say and what we're going to do. And now, to use Dan's point about training, you need to have the proper education training to do your job, as does everybody, right, in the company. So we need to look at things from a process perspective. What's critical about this process? What are we trying to control, right? And we need subject matter experts in quality, okay? So I can sit with folks in quality who are biologists and chemists. I'm not gonna, and I'm in quality. I'm not gonna go talk about the product. But yet we have people in our auditing teams, we have people on our quality teams who have no background in software telling people what to do with software. So there's a risk that the company's taking, right? That's not a risk-based approach. So we have to have the right people, the right mindsets to look at risk and really sort out risk. Where does it matter? Mm-hmm. And here, we look at things like Tulip, right? So we take things and we say, well, we can take this low-code, no-code application and it can really help advance us. And in all these different areas, in training, production, quality, in our labs and stuff like that. So Tulip can be used many, many different places. And if you go to the next slide, Dan, things like this, like digitizing logbooks, very simple, taking work instructions, digitizing those, right? All the way up to any kind of solution we can think of. That's what Tulip can actually provide. And so when we're looking at something like Tulip, we want to use it for GMP to eliminate paper. We get into discussions of validation again. Well, how do we validate these things here? And we're right back to we only have one size fits all. And so we're not thinking. We're shutting down, right? That's what we're doing. And we need to think of it as, again, digitizing a logbook is different than implementing my LIMS system. Two different things, right? When we're going to start introducing all kinds of artificial intelligence, machine learning, data with data lakes that we're using, more low-code, no-code applications, right? How do we have these things scalable that we can use them, that we can make an advancement? And it's funny how this industry, digital transformation and stuff like that, it's just getting up to the times. Technology changes so fast in everything we do. Why in the pharma industry are we still so far behind that we still have paper? We're still using pen and paper on things. Why is it like that? So there's plenty of tools out there to use this, and we have to come up with great processes that are scalable, that give us the ability to do things. And it's not a one-size-fits-all, and we use risk.
Yep. That's a great point. Michelle, any thoughts?
Yeah, I would say, to eliminate paper also, just to kind of add to that asterisk there, that's definitely one of the things that we want to get rid of, but why? It's not because the hot new project, but it's because it increases quality, right? And efficiency. Like I just go back to the controls again, these technical controls that are offered in these tools, increases quality. And by efficiency, I mean, by not having a second operator maybe come in and do that check or verification or things like that. But that is sort of the motivation and driver. And so, operational quality, operational validation folks maybe are the ones that need to come in, right? Like we want to talk about the right subject matter experts. I think somebody else mentioned that in the chat as well, is getting the right subject matter experts. It's not just the CSV folks. Their expertise is valuable, but it's really on the computerized systems side. When we're talking about controlling the processes that we're digitizing, it is your operational quality. It is your operational validation folks, maybe even regulatory, who knows? But like the point is, you want to make sure you're reaching out to the appropriate subject matter experts.
Yep, great point. So as we're getting to our final question, I want to remind the audience, if you have specific questions, I know there's been a lot of chat and it's very helpful. If you have specific questions that you would like us to address, please type them into the questions tab of the control panel so that we can address them accordingly. So Michelle, I'll start with you and then go to Bob around what advice do you have for companies that are looking to move beyond this traditional document-centric approach to validation to really unblock digital transformation initiatives?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I might be iterating a lot of points that both Bob and Dan have mentioned already, but I think one of the other things I wanted to highlight specifically is the cultural shifts, right? It's not just these new technologies and learning technologies and how to visualize and find data within these technologies, which is so important, but it is this cultural shift. And we talked a little bit about the digitization versus digitalization, and this is really also moving away from this document mindset. This is really something about, I would say, the revolution, I guess the industrial revolution that we're in now with the newer technologies versus some of the things that we were doing in the decades previous to this, which were very much more paper and glass type implementations, very much more just getting rid of paper and putting it on screen and making sure it looks exactly the same on screen, right? Like I said, those are some benefit. There are some benefits with those approaches, but really to kind of take the next step and get an order of magnitude more efficiency out of this, we really need to start talking or thinking more in a data-based approach. Data is ultimately important here. So that is sort of the first thing I wanted to highlight. And this, trying to do or execute or implement to this cultural shift, really, again, I think Bob mentioned the training. We need to make sure that our operators, our quality folks, and the people who defend compliance, both internally and externally, understand these digital tools, right? That is a shift that has to happen. It doesn't just happen because you use the digital tool. We have to understand them as well. And that's a part of learning anything new.
Yep.
So on the next slide, talk about learning something new. I draw the parallel to learning a new language because I think it's really almost the same thing. There are sort of stages that we go through when we are learning a new language. Hopefully some of you or most of you have had the opportunity to do this, but the first stage of learning a new language, they call it the cognitive stage. It's information gathering. I might draw the parallel, is when we're just learning vocabulary words in the new language, right? So we can understand this word means that word. And in a new digital tool, it's about finding about what this tool can do. The next stage, then you move into this associative stage where it's practice. You're starting to, and like learning a new language is like you're forming sentences. Maybe you can talk to people. Your level of being able to interact with people in this new language is increasing. In a digital tool that's maybe getting, doing these translations. Right now, I see a lot of this. This is, again, more of a paper on glass approach where this means explicitly this in the digital tool. And, stepwise, you go through and do that. And that's where, you'll get some benefits for sure. But it's really when we move into this autonomous stage. And what I love about the way this is highlighted here is this learning on autopilot. The point is you're still learning, you're still evolving, but you're on autopilot. And this language sort of parallel is, this is when you're starting to think and dream maybe in this new language, but you're still learning new words, you're still learning how to articulate and say, use that new language in a better way. Whereas in these digital tools, this really, learning on autopilot is really about now we have our process digitized and we're going to continuously improve, right? And it's instead of like editing a piece of paper or going through a document management tool, you're updating your processes in this technology. So the point here too, and we have this guy kind of sprinting up the stairs, but the point is take the steps. You have to, go through the process of learning these tools, go through the process of trying to translate what that means in these digital tools.
Yep. Great.
And then just lastly, I think you just have to challenge the status quo. I think hopefully that's coming through in my messaging here. We have the technology advances. They're here. We're hearing all the stuff that exists today, the stuff that are constantly evolving. Obviously, we've heard AI and ML. The technologies are out there. AI, ML, by the way, has been out here for many, many, many years. These are not new technologies, but they're here. I guess that's the point. Also, we are getting a lot of government and regulatory type, not support, but even like drivers, right? Like, okay, CSA is out there now. That is not a new thing. We're not talking risk-based is not new, but the point is their support is here. I go to a lot of the international conferences, and there are regulators from across the globe that are saying, do not use us as a crutch.
Yes.
You have to move on. There's increased quality in these controls. And these two things together are really providing the opportunity to life sciences organizations.
Yep. Bob, what are your final thoughts?
Yeah, just real quick. For me, it's just, again, just about critical thinking, right? Sticking with that and having scalable approaches. And you'll see some of the comments coming in here about, waterfall versus agile. Again, now you're getting pigeonholed into a methodology. It has to be flexible. Right? Yep. You need flexibility. You need to focus on what matters, and go from there.
I think that's an excellent way to transition to some of the questions. And Michelle, you talked about it. Having worked with regulators for many, many years, what we keep hearing from them is exactly what you said. Stop using us as an excuse for not modernizing. Right? So one of the questions that came up is around what tools can we use in order to support the process, right? What are the automated test tools that we are allowed and not allowed to use? And the answer is whichever ones work for you, right? The regulators aren't going to tell you, or let me rephrase it. We don't want regulators to tell us how to do things, because that prescriptive approach truly is a burden to industry, and there's no way they can keep up, right?
Right.
The important point is, which tools should I use? Which methodology should I use? The answer is whichever one works best for you. And actually, I had a discussion with somebody at FDA recently, and they actually brought up this point. Waterfall, agile, it doesn't matter. It's whichever one works best for you. Thoughts?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think we get carried away with these things here, right? What works best for you goes a long way, right? And if we're trying to say, hey, I want to follow this approach versus that approach, what difference does it make? As long as you're working on the critical things and the critical controls. So if you take a testing tool like Jira, for instance, okay? I've sat with people who said, we're not validating Jira. Okay. I've sat with people who said, we validated Jira. Okay. Both cases I went in and showed how the system was functioning incorrectly. Both cases. And it's a simple couple configuration settings and how you're controlling something that matters, right? That's it. How you're naming something, how you can set a certain flag, who has access to it. You're using critical thinking again as to what matters on this tool. Right. And so it doesn't matter, like you're saying, Dan, it doesn't matter what methodology you're using. It doesn't matter what tool you're using. If it works for you and you have the proper controls around it, then it works. And what are proper controls? I've argued that no matter what methodology you use, if you have a three-tiered environment of a development, production, or development, test, and production environment, no matter what methodology you use, you're always going to go back to waterfall because of the sequencing of the stuff, right? Going from a dev to a test to production. That's a waterfall. But it doesn't matter. What matters is, are there gates? Are there checks and balances? Who has access to what? Right? Things like that.
Yep. And you bring up an excellent point. Tools are tools, right? You use Jira, right. DevOps, whichever tool you want to use. When you're making a gear that's going to go into your packaging machine, do you care whether somebody used a manual file or a CNC machine? And did you validate the file that they used in order to make that gear or the CNC software? No, because what you care about is the output. Will the gear work in my machine? In software, we get into this mentality of, oh, I use Bitbucket, so I need to validate Bitbucket. I use Jira, so there's no requirement. Those tools do not, and actually that's part of the guidance. Those tools do not fall under the predicate rule. The predicate rule does not cover tools that you use to develop software. It only covers the software that you use for production quality system, or if you're in a medical device, that is software or that's part of a medical device, right? So anything else that you use is up to you. Go ahead, Michelle.
Well, so I think this is all very interesting. We could have this webinar for another half an hour just to answer all these questions because they're so great. But one I wanted to answer specifically was one from Lori, because I think it's a really good example of thinking and like what we're used to doing or what we've done in the past, right? So the question is, how do we move away from digitized documents or procedures instead of, or in addition to, the solution providing instruction? Now, with these new technologies, like you can combine it all together, right? And so traditionally, we would have a batch record, right, that walks you through, maybe do this step and this step and this step, different unit operations, what have you. On the side, you would have these SOPs that might describe how to do this step and how to do this step. And so, traditionally on the shop floor, you would have an operator with a batch record they're trying to fill out. You'd have a second SOP that you're trying to follow and make sure that you have the right version. But in these digital tools, this can all be combined together, right? This is as you're going through the steps of your manufacturing process, you have the instruction right on screen, right? And so what the great thing is that it's human centric, operator centric, meaning you give the operator the information that they're needed at the time it's needed. So if I have to execute this step, I'm given either, I don't know, text or maybe a video or a picture of something that allows me to fully understand what I need to do in that moment so that I can focus on executing that thing and capturing that data for that step. Okay. So again, the point is that it's all there as you're going through your process steps and understanding which process steps and which data elements are most important. Your control strategy is, if this is a step that, fails a lot because it's a complex step, then you include a video in that step or a picture that points to the part or the thing or the knob that you need to turn, right? But the point is, it's all there. It's at their screen. They can focus on that one thing. And these solutions are very composable. You can do that for one unit op, a large, you can add on as you need. You can start small. There's just so many opportunities there. And then one last thing before I kind of pass it back, Dan, is I wanted to make a point on the agile thing, agile versus waterfall. Agile to me means iterative, really. I mean, that's really what it means. The idea is that you iterate on these things. And again, going back to these tools, a lot of these newer tools like Tulip allow you to iterate quickly and fast. If you want to update one process step, you do that, you move on. And so I think that is really what I mean by agile versus waterfall, right? I think we need to kind of capture the fact that it's not these methodologies with or without certain documentation requirements, but they're really about getting value, iterating, moving on, continuously improving.
Absolutely. Bob, question for you. Somebody typed that digitalization is not something that is new to life science companies. There's been solutions for at least 20 years. So why Tulip instead of traditional solutions?
I'll let Bob answer that because
Yeah.
since I live at Tulip.
Yeah.
It's not just about Tulip, right? It's about, what technology is out there to help us solve a business process problem, right? That's going to be, cost effective to us, sustainable, right? Things of that nature. So whether it's Tulip or another application, we're looking for what's best out there for us to help drive costs down, drive efficiency, drive productivity, right? And, one of the things we look at is user experience, right? So I was just recently at one of our manufacturing sites last week on the shop floor in the packing area. And, they got 7 applications that are open. That's not efficient, right? Mm-hmm. And then when you say, well, can we throw on a Tulip application? They just look at you. How many more applications do you want to show? So it also gets back to user experiences. What can we use? And maybe sometimes the trade-off is keeping the current system and just enhancing that so it's a better user experience for people.
Yep. Absolutely.
There's a good question going on right now about this backup here, right? Backup systems.
Mm-hmm.
that comes up a lot, right? So we try to digitize, and so somebody wrote about, and Michelle was talking about, like, listen, I don't think we should have SOPs anymore in the industry. Okay, I think everything should be online. Everything, just like I go all around the world, I can do everything on my iPhone. I don't need any procedure. That becomes my procedure. My applications on my iPhone, my GPS system, all these things, and how we control it. And the question does come up, though. Well, what happens if that goes down? Well, what happens if it goes down? What happens if your current systems go down?
Yep.
Right? These things happen, and we should have, continuity plans. And where it matters, where it's critical in your process, you should really make sure you have a good backup plan in place, right? Yep. I don't know how many people on this call actually use Viva, but their platform went down last week for Viva, not for AstraZeneca, for Viva. So now what, right? You hope companies have backup plans, things like that.
Yep.
And so what happens when your systems go down anyway? You need to have some backup plans. And I always go back to what's critical. I'm not going to have a backup plan for everything, but that's what people want. Now, when you're digitizing things and you're moving forward, everything has to have a backup plan. It's like, again, risk-based, folks. Focus on what matters. Some things are going to have backup plans. Some things are not going to.
And you bring up an excellent point in something that I experienced recently. When you get on a plane right now and you look in the cockpit, when the pilots are actually executing their checklists, they're doing it on an iPad. But what if that iPad fails? Well, there's a redundancy. There's a second iPad that the co-pilot has to make sure that happens, right? So we're moving everything electronic to say, hey, we need to still carry all the books with all the checklists is not really a reasonable use of a risk-based approach. You look at the risk, you assess the risk, you identify, and then you have redundancies as appropriate. But you don't need to have redundancies for everything. Final thought. I know we're almost out of time. So, Bob, Michelle, what any parting thoughts that you have?
Michelle? Ladies first.
Sure, I'll go again. I encourage everyone to move forward. We can't continue where we are today. Like that's hopefully that's apparent, just what's going on in the world. We need to do it. The idea is to do it with thought and knowledge, right? You need knowledge in order to do risk-based approaches for sure, whether it's CSA or whatever other methodology. The point is we are controlling our products and processes to achieve patient safety. So, just to that end, I would just say, go for it.
Bob?
Yeah, and mine is very, very simple like that as well. It's just a challenge the norm, right? And think outside the box, challenge it, question it. I've questioned things all the way up to why do we even validate? Let's get rid of all of it and start from scratch. And people fall off their seat, but let's think like that and challenge everything, and let's make it better, right? And better for us, better for the patients, better for the companies that we work for and stuff, right? So, challenge things. Now's the time.
Excellent. My parting thought is based on what Bob mentioned. Be willing to take the risk. Actually, take the risk to take the risk, right? Be willing to use that and challenge and go outside of your comfort zone. Because if that's going to improve patient outcomes, lower costs, streamline the way that we do things, ultimately, that is the value proposition that as an industry, we need to adhere to. So with that, I want to take this opportunity to once again thank Bob and Michelle for a really great, insightful, and very energetic discussion. I hope the audience got some really good insights that they can take back to their organizations and challenge their internal regulatory inertias in order to improve patient outcomes. And finally, I want to thank Tulip for making this possible. Thank you all very much and enjoy the rest of your day.